that how I was processing information was different. I could always think on my feet pretty
Different
easily.
compared to what you had always been able to do. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the PTA Plus Podcast. I am Katie Sutton, your host. Today's guest, Gina Vitale, is a physical therapist assistant turned content writer. She now writes articles that are full of healthcare knowledge for her clients and really took her skills as a PTA and pivoted into a new career. She is the epitome of what PTA Plus is and what we are all about here at the PTA Plus Podcast. So I'm excited for you to hear about her story and how she made the connection between her career as a physical therapist assistant to now content writer, some of the challenges that she faced, including long COVID and very little return on investment at the beginning of her content writing career. And she really turned those into some wins. So I can't wait for you to hear more from Gina on what she is doing in the content writing realm. So hang tight. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the PTA Plus Podcast. I'm Katie Sutton, your host, and we have an amazing guest with us today. I'm so excited for everybody to meet Gina Vitale. And you'll probably also recognize that we are in a different recording studio today. I've been bouncing around between a bunch of different houses as I'm moving. So different rooms, different sounds, different mics, different equipment, all kinds of things, just continuously trying to make the show better. So hopefully you're getting good content from the PTA Plus podcast. But today's guest, Gina, I am super excited for everybody to meet Gina. Gina, you meet like the criteria of PTA Plus podcast, like the theory behind the podcast to a T. So those who've been listening for a while know that PTA Plus was kind of, the inception was PTAs who do other things or who are interested in learning new things or kind of have side gigs and things like that. So that's not the only thing that we talk about, but you definitely have a lot of those pluses at the end of your name. So I'm really excited for you to be able to describe that to everybody. Now, we met on LinkedIn.
We did.
Which is cool. So for anybody who's not on LinkedIn, you should get on LinkedIn.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, the last 3 recordings that I've done, of course, you and I met you on LinkedIn, and you were gracious enough when I reached out via message and said, "Hey, how would you like to come on my podcast?" And you said yes. I'm always impressed by people who say yes to things that maybe they're not familiar with.
Yeah.
But the other 2 recordings that I just released also were about content that I found or what we found on LinkedIn as well. So it's a great place to be.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I think if you're transitioning from clinical work into something and you're not on LinkedIn, it's going to make it that much more difficult, like extremely difficult. So I encourage everyone, even people who aren't transitioning careers, really use LinkedIn for what it's there for. Start connecting with people. You connect with people that you admire, but connect in areas that you know and areas that you want to go in, right? So, I obviously didn't just connect with therapists. I connected with writers and educators and, things of that sort, so that anybody that I thought it might be cool to either work with, or I could learn something from them, or I just thought that their content was amazing and I just wanted to keep following them. Then,
Yeah.
You never know where these connections can lead, which is why you have to do it. So
Absolutely. And that's how we became friends.
it is.
I saw that you were a content writer. I saw your name and it said PTA content writer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, whoa, what is this? And so then I clicked on it and I dug deeper and I started looking at some of your blog posts and things. And I was like, I got to be friends with Gina. I hope Gina's okay with me wanting to be friends with Gina. So.
You are the exact connection person that I always say yes to right away, and without doing the, you got to do the deep dive sometimes. Sometimes folks want to connect, and it doesn't seem like it's maybe a great idea.
Understood. You have to know when to say no, and you
You
have to
do.
yeah, know when you can take some of those risks and things like that. But it's interesting when you said that you were connecting with people on LinkedIn, that you were interested in what they were doing in their content, because we have had a couple of conversations on this podcast lately about getting in proximity to people that you want to either emulate or that you appreciate their style. So getting close to them and learning
Yep.
from them and seeing if it's something that you are good at and is
Yep.
it something that you want to do. So yeah, definitely shout out to LinkedIn. This is not, we're not like
I
paid for
know.
LinkedIn or anything like that.
They're getting all this free press,
I
or
know, right? Yeah. I
free
mean,
ad space or whatever. But no, that's kind of been a long time thing, right? Put yourself in rooms where, you can grow,
mhm,
right? You don't have to be comfortable. And in fact, most of it isn't comfortable.
mhm.
But if you're always comfortable, then you're not growing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I always say that I like to show up to places that PTAs aren't showing up to
Hmm.
and just start asking questions and kind of pull a seat up to the table.
Yeah.
And I haven't been kicked out of any rooms yet. So
Right. Right. Yeah, there's, getting outside of the box of your own little box is very important,
yeah,
for
definitely.
sure.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking for a minute because I do enjoy talking and speaking. That's part of who I am. But will you give our audience a real quick rundown of your background, about your PTA background, and then what are some of those things that make you a PTA plus? Like, what other things do you got going on that make you more than a PTA?
Um, so obviously writing now, um, that was an easy-ish route, not to figure out how to do the writing to make money, but that I knew I didn't want to go in these other spaces that other therapists were going, like the finance world, the tech world, sales, things like that. I had a little bit of an affinity for writing, and so that's what made me look into writing when I decided to leave clinical care. But to go like in the Wayback Machine, the the thing that led me to therapy was, I was an athlete as a child. I was a competitive gymnast until I was 15 and broke my back, and that was my initiation into therapy. And I had such great therapists that I thought, maybe that's a thing. And I, started college and as a chemistry major because I loved chemistry. And then I was like, oh, college chemistry is a lot different than high school chemistry. So staying within the sciences, because that's my strength. That's what I enjoy learning about. I considered biology and psychology, and then I kind of fell backwards into a therapy, a PTA program at Cuyahoga Community College. And I had lost my grant at Cleveland State because I kept changing my major. And they were like, you don't
Decided
have enough
chemistry wasn't
credits
for you,
to
huh?
keep going after 2 years or whatever it was, year and a half. So my mom pushed me to register at Tri-C. And while I was there, um, I picked up a catalog, and it listed all of the things. Somehow I opened to the page of PTA, and it listed all of these things that I really liked, anatomy and physiology. And I was like, I like all that stuff. And that's kind of how I decided, to change majors and do that. And then along the way, I became instructed. I became certified instructor for mat Pilates. So
Mm.
I
Mhm.
learned from, coincidentally enough, I went to a course that was given by a therapist, a PT. I can't remember her name right now, but um, it was a kind of a weekend study thing. And then you went in, well, it was like a week study. And then you went in and you did kind of like a lab thing for the
Mhm.
weekend. And by the end, we were all certified. It was built specifically for therapists, I think, that already had the anatomy and physiology background, so you could kind of fast track into the exercises and the series and whatnot. And so I became certified in mat Pilates through that. And I found it super helpful for me. And so I just kept doing it, and then started teaching because I was talking to the instructor after class one day, and she had mentioned something about my form, I think is what happened. And I was like, well, I was a gymnast, so I can't help it. It's just kind of like in my cells to, to have good form. And so she's like, did you ever teach? I'm like, no, I'm certified, but haven't taught. So I started subbing for her. And then, I ended up teaching for, I don't know, 10-ish years or something. All the while still, going into the clinic, treating patients. I did home care for about 8 years. I just needed a break from the clinic. And then I learned kind of a whole new skill set.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Home care.
You wear so many hats in home care.
Whole new thing. Yeah.
It's, you are like the lead every time you go. You have to be really observant of those patients, because a lot of them are like 2 steps away from crisis. And
Yeah.
so you have to, in good communication with your team, and, the nurse and the PT who does the evaluation, and all that kind of stuff. And then I went back to the clinic, in clinic outpatient orthopedics, because that has always been my love, when I moved out to Seattle, because I knew in a new city, I wasn't going to try to figure out how to do home care. And it's a good thing, because once you're there and you realize how hard it is to get around in Seattle, home care would be a nightmare. So, so then I worked in outpatient ortho out in Seattle for another, I don't know, 7 years. I think I was out there, just under 8 maybe. And in 2020, when COVID became a thing, Seattle was kind of ground zero for COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and no one knew anything, right? And
Looking back, we were
I
all
mean,
clueless.
every day we had like team meetings in clinic, and well, here's what they think now, and here's what we're gonna do, and they didn't even know it was airborne, and we were treating every day, cleaning everything with these like caustic chemicals. Our hands were peeling.
I mean, remember bringing groceries home, like, and you would like wipe everything down, and
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, yeah. And it wasn't because they thought touch was the, contact transmission, right? Meanwhile, no one was like, hey, maybe we should wear masks until like
maybe.
everyone started getting sick. And then I got sick in March. And through that experience, and then, being continually sick for like way longer than anyone said it was going to be, people were going to be sick. I decided that I needed to transition out of clinical care. I knew I needed to transition out of clinical care before that, but that was kind of like the kicks, that was like the last straw. I couldn't manage. I didn't feel like I was the same therapist after I got sick the first time. So that really like spurred me into learning to write. How do I do this? How do I get paid for that? So, that's kind of a really roundabout way to go from PTA to content writer, but here we are.
Yeah, I'm going to pop something up here on the screen, because you and I were just talking about this before we hit record. And I just actually did a podcast on this not that long ago, but it was this topic here from by James Clear. And he's the one who wrote the book Atomic Habits. So, all of these questions that you asked yourself, I don't know what order you asked them in, but, where are the fascinating people? In what ways can I make money with them? Which ones am I good at? And what do I enjoy? So these are some of the things that kind of help us determine like how we can have a good career. So you just essentially spelled it out without me even having to say it. So
I accidentally answered a question.
You were already doing all of those things. So
Yeah,
isn't
well,
that,
if you don't
yeah,
stop
pretty
me
amazing?
talking, sometimes it never ends. So
Yeah, great. Well, we'll just go ahead and dive right in. You have such a wealth of information to bring. And like I said, I just can't wait for everybody to kind of hear a little bit more about your story of becoming a content writer. You fill in so many of these PTA plus, you're a previous gymnast and a Pilates instructor and home health. That's like, you have to be just versatile and
yeah,
on your feet in home health. I never did home health. It was the one area I never really worked in. But like the more I'm learning about it from other colleagues and friends, it's just incredible what's expected of of PTs and PTAs in the home healthcare setting.
yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
you really like every visit. You are triaging essentially, like what are the problems? What's happened since last time? And again, you might be the only person that patient sees all week. If the nurse isn't going, if they do the open and like, oh, the meds are fine, blah 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 blah, it's just therapy. You're the only person that they
Mhm.
see, and I always felt like it's not going to happen on my watch. So I always made sure I asked questions about are you eating? Did you take your medicine? Did the,
Mhm.
is if they had an aide coming in, are they helping you with your back? You really have to kind of tick all these boxes to keep them out of the hospital,
Yeah.
because a lot of them are, I was saying before, it's, they're two steps away from crisis,
Mhm.
because they don't stay in the hospital that long anymore, right? They basically
No.
kick people out once they're stable, and if skilled care is not indicated, then they go home. So and they're fending for themselves basically. But
Yeah.
yeah, I learned so much when I did home care, and then when I went back into outpatient care, I just felt like that helped me so much more, to
Yeah.
really understand, like to ask those questions. What's going on at home? I really,
Mhm.
not that you didn't ask it before, but I really saw firsthand how what's happening at home impacts people when they come, they would come see me in outpatient.
Yeah.
So you just,
Definitely.
you learn just so many skills, um, depending on where you are in your therapy life.
Yeah. And this is a great segue to a question that I actually had for you. And that was because you were a PTA for such a long time before you transitioned into the content writing. So like what parts of being a PTA still like follow you into your writing today? Like are there things that you remember from patient care that you're like, that's something that needs to be talked about?
I think, I mean, the probably the main thing is being able to communicate with all different kinds of people, um, but communicate effectively. Um, so, in patient care, you have to be able to, ask the right questions and know how to decipher the answer sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
and simplify it maybe. The the educational aspect of patient care, you're constantly educating patients on their condition or their prognosis, what to expect, their exercises, their any lifestyle changes that you see might help that person that maybe no one else has addressed. Um, so in content writing, I have to be able to communicate well, and I have to be able to educate, because content writing is essentially educating either, for me, healthcare. So a healthcare business, um, healthcare potential clients that a business might want to reach out to, um, like patient facing website pages about certain conditions, and writing that in a way that someone, just a regular Joe who doesn't have any healthcare knowledge, can read it and be like, oh, okay, I get what this is now. And so I'm still educating. I'm just doing it
Hmm.
in a different way. I'm still communicating what I think, are good pieces of health information. I'm just doing it in a different way. I'm not doing it on hands on, with hands on care, blabbing on about, whatever. I'm educating while they're doing their exercises. I'm writing it instead.
Yeah. Which
So
is its own skill in and of itself. I think of I don't, just writing can be taken wrong, so like if you think of like your emails, I'm always so cautious that when I write an email, I'm like, I hope that it came across as if it was nice. Like I don't want to, but so written communication can be taken wrong so often, and you don't have that facial expression and body language to go with it. So it really it has to be a skill that you had to refine and kind of hone in.
You do. I mean, just like anything else, the more you do it, the more practice you get with it, the better it gets. You also learn how to listen to what the client wants. More so, I have this tendency to kind of jump ahead a few steps already, like once they start talking, and I have to really, try to just hold it, because I also like don't want to forget, what I want to, hey, questions that I have or whatever. But, it's super helpful. And good clients will do this. You'll get a brief, it's called, and it explains the nature of the project, or how they want the content written. It could be like a certain style they like to use, a company voice that they use, a tone, and how they speak with, their web audience. And you have to know the audience. And so
Mm-hmm.
I obviously write things differently that I know are going to be professionally facing. If doctors and scientists are going to be reading this, then, I can use all the fancy jargon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if, the average Joe's reading it, you have to write it in a way that it's engaging. You're not just talking at people, because, I mean, nobody really wants that. And, it needs to be, simplified so that the company gets their point across, but, they're not overloaded with information. It's a balance, kind of a fine line that you learn as you go. I had some writing skill, which is why I leaned into writing, but through following, and don't ask me their names because there's so many, but through following other content creators and content writers and copywriters and doing some courses here and there,
Mm-hmm.
you learn these things. It is something that, yes, you can jump into without a journalism degree or an English degree, because you'll see that on job ads a lot. But, if you don't give yourself the tools, right? If you don't help yourself learn the tools of this new trade that you're trying to get into, it's going to make it super, super difficult. And so it's just, there's just building blocks.
Yeah.
You learn as you go also.
Yeah.
Sometimes you learn, all right, well, that didn't work so well, so I guess I won't do that anymore,
Yeah.
So
What do you think the steepest learning curve was for you to make that jump? Like, was there something that you can look back on now and you go, man, that was the absolute hardest part for me? With podcasting, it was editing. I
okay.
self-taught myself how to edit, and it took forever, and I messed it up so many times, and I wasn't very good at it. And but then I got better at it, and I'm faster at it now. And hopefully I won't have to do that forever, but there's always a learning curve with everything that we do that's new.
There is. And I will say the first thing that popped into my head when you started asking the question, was I had a patient, who had become, she was a public speaker, but also writing, had a newsletter and whatnot. And we were talking during her treatment, and I was explaining to her how, I was working on becoming a writer to transition out of patient care. And she said, well, for starters, you have to start thinking of yourself as a writer. You can't keep telling yourself that you need to do this to become a writer, or you need
Mm-hmm.
to have this, take this course and become a, because I was explaining like, oh, I follow this person, and but their course is like $300, and I'm like, I don't have that right now. And she was like, you have to start thinking of yourself as a writer. You are a writer. Do you write things? Yes, you're a writer. And it was, that transition from only thinking of yourself as a clinician
Mm-hmm.
into now considering yourself a whole other type of professional. That was a really hard jump for me, really
Mm-hmm.
hard,
Mm-hmm.
because, for like 30 years, all I knew was patient care.
Yeah.
That's what I did. That was like ingrained in me. Like, I'm that person who, goes somewhere and watches people walk and, like, oh, well, they must have some pain in their hip or whatever. Like, you don't turn off being a clinician.
Mm-mm.
And so
No.
that was a really hard learning curve to learn how to think of yourself in a different way,
Oh
that
yeah.
I could go in another direction. And
Yeah,
so,
I can
it
totally.
doesn't 100% maybe answer the question, but that's the first thing I thought of when you said that. I was like, oh, I remember that lady. And I still get her newsletter, actually.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but it just never occurred to me that you could just, you could just change like that. You didn't need some long drawn out schooling and, board exams and all of the things that we do in healthcare and continuing ed and, all of that stuff that we do to be a healthcare professional. There wasn't the same. I was thinking along those lines, like, well, shouldn't I do this, weekend college or something? You just
Yeah.
start. You
Yeah.
just start it. You do it and you learn the skills.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's terrible and sometimes it's great. And, you celebrate your small wins.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that was another topic of discussion not that long ago was the whole thinking of yourself beyond a clinician or beyond a PT or a PTA, especially for someone who's looking in a job search. If you keep putting in physical therapist or physical therapist assistant in all of your job searches, you're going to keep getting the same result over and over again. So if
Right.
you're trying to make a transition to something else, you're going to have to really break down your skills and do the whole, what else am I good at? What else do I have knowledge in? It's start punching in those keywords instead
Right.
of, PT or PTA. And again, there's nothing wrong if you stay in the clinic. That's completely fine. We need PTs and PTs in the clinic. But if you're trying to make a transition, you got to think a little bit broader. Got to think of yourself in all those other ways. What else am I besides PT?
Right. You have to, like you said, you have to put yourself in those other rooms.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Have a conversation with someone, in finance or something, if you think that you might be interested in that, because, my partner always says, boyfriend, I don't know, 900 years old. So I always hate saying boyfriend, but, he always says there's no downside to having a conversation with someone.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And the worst case scenario is it's not the direction you want to go, but at least now
Mm-hmm.
now you have that knowledge, and to move on from that, and you don't need to revisit it. But what if that conversation you have, is the one that makes the light bulb go on for you?
Mm-hmm.
That like a year ago, you would have never considered I'm going that direction from the clinic.
Yeah.
So
And you're probably going to get a lot of feedback from that conversation, whether that individual knows that they're giving you feedback or not. Usually, and I always say to people, if someone asks you to do something, at least explore it. If they come to you and say, hey, there's this opportunity, you can say no, and
of
that's
course,
fine. And you don't have to say yes, but you should at least explore that opportunity. And by having yourself close to those people, where you're having those conversations, you're going to get feedback. And like you said, if that conversation doesn't go in the direction you thought, then it's okay. But what was the harm? You had a great
exactly,
conversation. You know?
exactly. It's there's that, like, oh, I guess you think of it as like I failed at that, or and oh, that's no, it's you decided that right then and there that that's not the direction you want to go. So how could that be a failure? I've had so many people reach out to me on LinkedIn about opportunities, and now I know how to recognize them. So I politely say, well, is it this? Because then I already know I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
But I
Mhm.
spoke to several people in the finance world, because they said that people transition very nicely from healthcare professional into the finance world,
Mm.
because of your skill set. And
Interesting.
so they reach out to you, that they reach out to all kinds of medical professionals, because they know that they have the ability to learn new things and to organize and, to deal with
Work with limited
chaos.
resources.
And
Yeah.
then, yeah. So, but after several conversations, I just realized that wasn't a thing for me. But, when people reach out now, I ask some questions.
Mhm.
what's the harm in that?
Yeah.
What is it about? Or, is it in this area? I'm not very interested in that area. If so, I appreciate, and be polite, of course,
Mhm.
because they're just trying to make a living too.
Of course. Yeah. Mhm.
And you never know, where that circle goes, who's connected to who. And so obviously you want to be professional, even on messaging.
Mhm.
But if you don't have those conversations, then, I think it hinders your database, you're building that you're getting this information, you're pulling it in from all areas. And now you're trying to streamline it into, turning that into some kind of direction for a career. So,
Mhm.
just look at it as data, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So tell us about, because this is something that is like probably going to be new to most of the audience, unless I have a lot of people who are content writers. But what's it like finding the first person to work with, like getting that first gig? What was that like, and what did you learn from it?
So, like lots of new content writers and other kinds of creative people, Upwork is a platform where you can kind of um, get your feet wet. And so I made a profile on Upwork, and I wasn't really finding anything. And I had, you bid for jobs basically on Upwork, and a lot of people said that that's a good place to start. So I did that, and I wasn't really getting any hits. One of the other things that other writers will tell you, you need to kind of build your samples. They don't have to be doesn't have to be that someone paid you to write this, but you can offer to write for people that and for me, since I knew health was my niche, I reached out to people that I already knew that had their own businesses and said, hey, do you have any need for any content writing, so for their website, or maybe they have um, a newsletter, or
Mhm.
whatever. So I wrote like my one friend said, well, I do have this kind of like brochure that when I do these shows, once in a while she'll go to like health shows or whatever, and I hand it out. She's like, that needs updating. And so I did that. And okay, so now
Yeah.
you have a sample. But anyway, so um, going back to Upwork, um, that is where this company found me and reached out to me. So that's one of the other things that can happen on things like Upwork. I'm not on Fiverr, but I understand Fiverr is similar. Um, so not only can you look for jobs and bid on jobs, but people can find you. So this lady reached out to me, and they had a need for some corporate wellness content. They were getting ready to have a big board meeting. I guess they were trying to convince the board to give them more money for some community outreach or something. And she asked me to write um, I, more of an article, I guess. Jeez, it's so long ago now. It definitely was not a blog post, but it was some information she could bring to her board meeting. And so very fact driven about like socioeconomic problems and healthcare access, and things of that sort. um, and it was like super low paying. Like, if you broke it down into how many hours I worked on it, and the $25 that she paid me, literally $25
Wow.
for probably 800 to 1,000 word piece that was researched,
Mhm.
and just again, my first one, so it was like it was probably took me longer than it should have, but yes. So I was super excited to get that $25. Like, you can't even imagine. Like, I
Yeah.
was like, I got 25. I mean,
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
just like, it was amazing. But she found me on Upwork. And then we did work together on another project that it turned out she just really like to dangle the carrot of, well, the next one will be more money and the next one will be more money. Until I did a project for her. I only did 3, I think. And then I did one for her and she never paid me.
Oh no.
Yeah. It's not uncommon.
Oh.
It's not uncommon.
Mm.
And you learn to look for these things. Now I have a contract.
Yeah.
I require a 50% deposit before, again, you live and learn, right?
Things that you learned.
So
Yeah.
I made the mistake.
Yeah.
I went, because you go through Upwork, you do have some protection. But again, you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And you can petition through Upwork, I guess, to get reimbursement. And then, but if the people don't ever answer, then I
Yeah.
don't know what you're going to do.
You can do it
So
right.
that
Yeah.
was the first kind of big, like, paying thing that I got. And I was like super stoked about it.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things that you mentioned that I found was interesting was that you brought up your network and your connections. So, you were able to reach out to certain people because you had built a network. And that is so important. I talk about it on the show all the time. Building your network, getting out there, getting your name out there. You've got to build those connections and networks. It's amazing the doors that can open. And then the return on investment. And I know you didn't use that word or that phrase in particular, but not everything that we do to improve ourselves is going to give us an immediate return on investment, right?
Right.
So, you doing that $25 job might not have made you a millionaire, obviously, $25, but it gave you a very valuable learning experience. And now that you've learned, you don't have to say yes to free things anymore. You can
Yes.
say, I know my skill set. I know what I bring to the table. This is my price.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just, I think it's just part of the growing pains, of being a content writer, especially, but maybe just for any transition, you're going to make mistakes. Um,
Right? Yeah.
I don't have a great business head, but my boyfriend does, and so I very often will, after a discovery call conversation with a potential client, I'll run over some things with him so that, because my brain just doesn't work that way. Does this make sense? Does that make sense or whatever? And, and he'll help me with the contract or whatever, over time, now I know, like, okay, I'm going to write the contract this way. And,
Yeah.
I'm going to, but it was super helpful to have that, again, for me, it's my person who has the good money head, but, in the business head. But, there are people out there that are willing to, give you free information, and free help if you look for it.
Mhm.
And I hate to, God, LinkedIn is just getting such, a great, ad from this conversation, but
Seriously, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's really true. I've learned so much from people just in the things that they post on LinkedIn.
Mhm,
And then, and that could lead to, oh, well, let me look at this a little further and let me, and then you're teaching yourself. Like you said,
mhm,
a lot of it is, with the editing, you taught it mostly to yourself, right?
mhm,
And a lot of this world, this content writing world is like that. There's tons of information out there. You don't have to buy, $1,000 course and learn every aspect of writing. And, you kind of
mhm,
have to find your niche. There's all kinds of writing to do. It doesn't have to be content writing.
mhm.
Um, this is just where, I thought my strength lied because of the educational component. Um, I just found that no matter what, I was able to, explain things in a way that people could understand it, where the subject is not something that they know.
Yeah. Yeah, well,
So,
it's great that you found that strength in yourself to
right.
know and kind of really got yourself honed in on your skills. Because I think, sometimes people wander around in life and maybe never never get to that point, but
It's
yeah.
easy to wander in that in between space. It's
Mhm,
really easy. It's also really easy to take course after course after course if you have those means,
mhm,
or get this certification. I have a couple of certifications that I got off of, one was HubSpot, one was, Allison. And so again, there's a lot of great information out there. You don't have to pay for it, but at some point you have to do it.
You got to hit the start button.
You have to do the writing. You
Yeah.
can't just keep learning about it, learning about it. You have to physically do it. And that is how you learn. If you don't, if you don't put pen to paper, or finger to keyboard, then you don't have any way to get clients, and you're never going to learn how things actually work. It's like in school for healthcare, right? There's all this theory, but until you go out and actually put that theory to use and treat a patient, you don't know how to treat a patient just by reading a book. Well, you don't know how to do content writing just by taking a course. You have
No,
to do it.
yeah. Well, and you and I, sadly, we had a really great conversation before we hit record. So hit the start button, right? Like I should have just hit the start button when we started talking before
Yeah.
we actually did. But that was a concept that you and I were talking about. I don't have a background in journalism or communication or anything like that. This podcast idea was kind of pitched to me from a friend, colleague that thought that it might be something I would be good at or decent at. And I don't know how to measure that exactly because it's not a full-time gig for me. But I told you that I was really worried about having a polished product.
Yep.
I've fought putting this on YouTube because I was like, I don't, what if it's messy and it's not good? And what if my internet cuts out? And, I had all of these, a million excuses. Well, now I'm transitioning into YouTube. But I had to hit the start button. It wasn't always pretty. There are some podcasts that are better than others, not the guests, me. Some of my work might have been better than others. I have always had fantastic guests on the podcast, but I had to start somewhere,
You
because
do.
that's the only way that you will learn. And
Yeah.
now I go back and I'm like, well, I'll never do that again because it didn't work out for me. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't
Yeah.
learn if I didn't hit start.
It's scary, but what worth, doing isn't uncomfortable and scary sometimes, right? It's,
Right. Yeah.
you just have to do it anyway, and I think, and we talked about this earlier, that I think that lots of people are uncomfortable and doing it anyway. And so for me, I think that helps. Like, if you think about everyone as, well, no one really knows what they're doing. Yeah, that's kind of the joke with like being an adult, right? Like no one
Yeah.
really knows
Well,
what they're doing.
I
Well,
think
I,
there's truth to that. Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, but I think that too, on the professional level, I think a lot of people that, they step outside their comfort zone, and that's where the things happen. You're not going to
Mhm.
grow if you're not, if you're comfortable, you're not going to grow.
Yeah.
So, you have to be
Absolutely.
uncomfortable in order to make that transition. It's
Yeah.
not an easy thing. I'm not saying it's easy. Believe me, this is, where are we? 2025. So this is, I'm 4.5 years in, from when I very first was like, okay, how do I physically get out of this clinic? Because,
Mhm.
with the long COVID, I was like,
Mhm.
my brain does not work like this anymore.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. What if you don't mind me asking, and if you're okay with sharing with the audience, what what was it like when you started to wrap your head around the long COVID and what your what it would allow you to do and be comfortable in your work? I don't know if I'm asking that question correctly, but um because
I,
I think it had something to do with you deciding to pivot, but like how did you know that this was affecting you as much as it was?
because when so I was off work for 3 months. Most of that time I was still pretty sick. And the rest of the time was, they just really weren't busy enough for me to come back to the clinic yet. Because it was only a few months in. At that point, it was like June or July. I got sick in March, April, May, June. Yeah. So like I went back like kind of part-time in June, like, and they're like, well, we'll increase your hours as we go, whatever. Um, I was having conversations with patients like I had always done for my entire life and my entire professional life. And I was getting lost in the middle of my conversation, which obviously I know happens with middle age anyway, but it was like a defining line. Like it wasn't just
Mhm.
normal, like I trailed off. It was like I was in the middle of explaining something to a patient and there were no more words.
Mhm.
And I realized this is before they even had a long COVID term for it,
Mhm.
I realized that how I was processing information was different. I, could always think on my feet
Mhm.
pretty
Different compared
easily.
to what you had always been able to do.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
And then I realized a few weeks into, and it was like super like frustrating and scary. And I was talking to coworkers, and they were just, no one really knew what to do. They were just
Mhm.
like, "Oh, I'm sorry." Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I kept going to my supervisor and saying like, I'm having a really hard time, transitioning back to work. And, I don't think it's like a normal, what I'm going through, I don't think is normal. And then so, cut to a year later with the UW. Thank God for University of Washington, because they were, I think, one of the first people to open a long COVID clinic, or a post COVID clinic, they called it. And that's where I found out that that's what was going on. And the processing information and the brain fog were two of the biggest factors, I think, to when I realized um, I'm obviously straining my brain to be here. I still gave the best care I could, and
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
learned to excuse myself when I felt like things were going like off the rails. I
Mhm.
was also
Yeah.
very emotional at that time too, because because I didn't understand what was going on, and
Yeah, yeah.
I was trying to just jump back in. And it was, almost like I had like a PTSD
Yeah.
from
Mhm.
how I got COVID, the OG COVID, when no one knew anything. And I was homesick by myself and thought I was going to die. It was like, that there was a lot to process.
Yeah.
So, I didn't know how much of that was, just me trying to get back to work, and how like, oh, well, maybe this is just the new me. This is how my brain is
Mhm.
now. And you know, there's good days and bad days.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have a long stretch of good days, and then other days, I'll work on a project for a couple of weeks, for a couple of days, like early on in the week. And then by the end of the week, it's like, I could just stare at the computer and
Wow. Yeah.
nothing is computing. And I just know that, I mean, I could keep staring at it, but it's not going to happen. So
Wow.
I have to kind of walk away and let my brain kind of rejuice.
So
That's,
5 years later, it still lingers, huh?
it's, yeah, I mean, it's a lot better. I've also had COVID two more times since then. Twice I had it just from patient care.
Oh.
Um, and the last time I got it was Christmas time of 2023.
Mm.
We
Mhm.
accidentally had a super spreader Christmas Eve.
Oops. Oh.
um,
Oh.
out of sight,
Yeah.
out of mind. Like nobody was really
Yeah.
thinking like, maybe we should test before we have 30 people in this
Yeah.
house, or,
But we have
so.
to owe ourselves a little bit of grace in these, instances because I don't think that nobody means to do that kind of stuff. So,
No,
we
no,
gotta give
no.
ourselves some grace.
No,
Yeah.
no. But the having it three
Mhm.
times with
Yeah.
already having what I feel like are some
Yeah.
deficits from how my brain used to work, and and the fatigue factor, and things of that sort. Like I can't do a lot of the things that I used to do,
Mhm.
um, the way I used to do them.
Yeah.
I have to approach things differently now, because my brain works differently now. And I'm constantly having to remind people about that, even within my inner circle
Mhm.
that know me well and have seen me through this
Yeah.
time. That, you know, just, remember, like, I need a few minutes to process this. And, you know, my brain doesn't work the way it did. And I know
Mhm.
you've known me for 10 years, but that's the old me. This is the new
Mhm.
me.
Yeah.
And so, um,
Well, you gotta be
so
an
anyway, so
advocate
that
for
was one of the
yourself.
big drivers with getting out of the clinic faster.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, and it
Besides
sounds like
knowing
you
that I was going to be leaving the country too. So
yes, yeah, which is also extremely cool. But yeah, it sounds like you recognized and you knew yourself well enough to know your limits, and you're comfortable advocating for yourself, saying, "This is something I can't do anymore," or because of the way my brain and body works right now, it's not something I can do and do to the best of what you want to,
Yeah. Well, and
the best of the ability that
sustainably.
you want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I could work in the clinic all week,
Hmm.
but then I was just done, by
Yeah.
the end of the
Hmm.
week, that was it. Like, don't ask me to think about anything
Hmm.
else.
Yeah.
Just the fatigue from trying so hard to be, the best clinician that I could be, that it proved very taxing.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
like I said, was leaning into leaving before COVID, but that was the final straw.
Did you get any pushback from anybody when you announced your big plans to like go from PTA to writer? Was there anybody who was like, "What are you doing?"
Um, I wouldn't say like huge pushback. No. Well, there's always a parental aspect of, what are you doing? Because that's how parents are.
Uh-huh.
But they also knew my struggles. And pre-COVID, and this being a PTA, there was always, this sort of dangling, oh, they're cutting reimbursement for PTAs, and they're,
Mm-hmm.
so I had, like I said, I had started to think about leaving the clinic anyway. So mostly the people in my inner circle, they were pretty supportive actually, because, they knew that I wanted out.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and, you know, I didn't feel like, I'm also really stubborn. And so, if someone's like, well, you can't do that, or I don't think you should do that. Oh, I'm going to big fat do it anyway then.
And I'll take pictures.
Yes, right. So, yeah, I didn't feel that. I was
Good.
lucky enough to, like I said, have some
Yeah.
external support, not a
Mhm.
ton, but enough to kind of keep me afloat while I was, trying to figure out what I was doing, and taking these, side jobs, where I'd be in the clinic all week, and then I would work on the, on the writing, over the weekend,
Mhm.
um, or like getting my website together, and all that kind of stuff. I have a website guy who's amazing, and manages my 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 learning capacity for tech very well. That was a third time's a charm thing. The first two web people basically took my money and ran.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awful.
yeah.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
again, learning curve. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I didn't have a big budget, and so I took people at their word that they would, and what I had was a minimally functioning website that I couldn't even get into. Like, I couldn't get into the back end of it to do anything. Not that I even knew how to do that. And so my web guy really helped me with that. But see, now I went off on a tangent. I don't even know
No,
what
it
we
was
were
it
talking
was good. Perfect. Yeah.
about.
So, what kind of advice would you give to other healthcare professionals that kind of feel like they're maybe ready to try something new? They might feel a little burnt out. I have an issue with the word burnout, by the way, but that's another soapbox that I'll stand on. But
It's
um,
really overused now. And I think it glosses over too
mhm,
many things that
yeah,
healthcare professionals deal with.
yes, yeah, yeah. And I always say, I'm like, you can get burnout if you're a plumber, if you're an
Sure.
attorney, if you are a physician, if you work in a banking, whatever, you name it. I think you can get burnout in anything. To me, I'm always looking for ways that we can soften that, so it doesn't seem like it's only in a specific silo, because I think we tend to look at ourselves and go, "Oh my gosh, I work in PT and I'm so burnt out," and but it's not just an us problem, it can be systemic. But so, anyways, I digress. But what kind of advice would you give for somebody who's a healthcare professional that's thinking about making that pivot without throwing all their healthcare knowledge away?
So for me, I started Googling, of course, and I started looking at things that were sort of like healthcare adjacent.
Hmm.
Um, and like, taking some courses in medical billing, and, taking, what was the other thing I looked at? Oh, learning how to be a patient advocate, like a professional patient advocate. Things that, like, again, like, okay, I'm not going back to school. That was number one. I was not going to do any like formal education. I was like, this brain ain't having school anymore. So, um, And even before COVID, I hated school. I did the work. I got out. I wasn't one of those people, there's those career like students. I was never going to be that person. I'm not going to have 8,000 letters after my name ever. It's not going to be a thing. But I was looking at what could I do. So I knew that about myself. So I was looking at what could I do that didn't involve me going back to school formally. Yes, courses and things, but not like formal schooling. And so I think that you have to look at when you want to make that transition, you have to be honest with yourself about what am I willing to go through in order to do this transition? What am I capable of doing? So for some people, they want to do they want out completely. They don't necessarily want to use their healthcare knowledge. And, maybe that's the person who looks into going to some MBA program somewhere. That's fine. If you 100% know you don't want to do formal schooling, then, you look at things where, maybe this, 3-day certification course is going to be something that helps me get in, my foot in the door in this genre or, whatever it is that you choose. But I think number one is you have to look at what am I willing to do to make this change? Am I willing to go to school? Am I willing to take a pay cut? Am I willing to, decrease my clinic hours to put in more time which is what I ended up doing, gradually kind of backing down my clinic hours so that I had more time to write. So I think you have to look at what are you willing to do first, and then, look at what do you like to do? Like when you're not at work, when you're not in the clinic, when you're not patient facing and, you put on your, clinician persona, what do you like to do? And can you make money in that? Because the bottom line is, everyone has bills to pay. You
Yep.
just do. No one lives in a vacuum, except for maybe, some of those, folks that are like off the grid or whatever. Like I'm never going to be off the grid. I like electricity. I like running water. I
Same.
like going to Whole Foods, you know, but, it's what do you like to do that you could potentially make money at?
Mhm.
And then start looking at other people who did that. Connect yourself with people who are in the direction that you think you want to go. Those have to be, your network of professionals. It could be mentors. It could be someone who's at the same level as you. It could, don't necessarily only look at a title, but just start looking at things that you can do that will use the knowledge you already have. If you're a person like me who was like, I'm not going back to school,
Yeah.
and so yeah, it takes some searching. I was doing this search like when I was part-time at the clinic, just transitioning back into full-time work. And so every time I did, I think I was doing like 3 days, not even full days, initially. And on my off days, that was my job. My job was what information can I get for free on the internet that is going to help me make this transition out?
Mhm.
And that's, there's late nights and there's weekends where, you just have to accept, yeah, would I like to go go hiking and hang out at this brewery after? Sure. Cause that's a big Seattle thing. It's basically what you do in Seattle. um, but hey, this weekend I'm going to take this, this course, or
Mhm.
there's this person who's giving an hour long webinar that's free, and take advantage of the free info because there's a lot of it out there.
Absolutely. Gina, I couldn't have said any of that better. I mean, seriously, you hit all the points, especially you hit a lot of things that I have been having conversations about with other people on the podcast. So, I mean, you wrapped that up perfect with a
Oh,
bow on top of it for everyone. So I
thanks.
appreciate that.
I
Yeah.
like things neat and tidy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was perfect. So, Gina, tell
Hmm.
our audience where they can find some of your information. I know you're on LinkedIn, but in what other ways can they find some of your writings and contact you?
So I also have a website. It is GinaVitaleWrites.com. That's kind of a fun thing, actually, like when you're looking up domains and what you could
Yeah.
name your thing. And one of the pieces of advice that I got that I thought was really helpful when I was trying to figure out what's a good name is don't be catchy. Your URL, your domain name should basically say like what you're doing. And so
Yeah.
like Gina Vitale Writes was available after, multiple, well, try this, try that, try that. So that's what I chose. I also have a profile on Medium. Although I haven't been super active on that because I've been a little busy. So that's good, being busier. And well, yeah, LinkedIn. I'm on there.
Yeah. And you can, like, I've connected to your writings from LinkedIn. So, I can
Yeah, there's I have an Authory account, it's called, where you can, other than having a website, you can create a portfolio of pieces that you've written for like health publication websites, like for me. And they will go and find, once you make your account, they will go and find those pieces if they're still available on the internet and attach them to your profile. And so now, instead of when something publishes that I write, instead of taking that URL and adding it to my individual blocks on LinkedIn, then I just put it on my Authory page. Because again, I learned the hard way that if a company that you write for no longer exists, neither does your content.
Oh, man, that's
so I was able to go back. I contacted an editor actually last year and said, do you have the originals or the, whatever they used? And I can't remember what CMS they used, what content management system they used. So she went back and she's like, well, tell me which ones you want. And so I think I gave her 5. And she went back and found and made PDF documents of all that stuff. So like those documents are on my in my Authory profile, which is on LinkedIn, because that website was changed also. And so one of the things you learn as an upcoming new writer is, you take those jobs as they come, but some of these startups just don't make it. Yeah. And then, so.
Great advice. Gina, this has been so enlightening.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Love all of it. Thank you for sharing. You shared some things that you learned from. I don't want to call them failures because I think that they got you to where you are, but thanks for also sharing your wins. I think it's important for us to recognize both sides of those. We're not going to get anywhere if we don't make those mistakes and have failure. So
exactly.
I appreciate your time, and I can't wait to release this and let everybody hear all the amazing things that our new friend, Gina Vitale, PTA and content writer, is doing.
Thank you so much.
Yes, we'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening to PTA Plus, the podcast for PTAs by PTAs. Subscribe, follow us on social, and share the show. Elevate yourself. This show is for educational purposes only. No clinical decision-making should be made from its content. See you next time.